Democracy, democracy, democracy is an idea that is so dominant that most would not characterize themselves as being pro-democracy any more than I would characterize myself as being pro-breathing. It's just something that is assumed to be good. It's ingrained that it's good. Little children rebelling against the king, rebelling against authoritarian, evil monarchs. Right, the evil monarch, the mean king, the unjust king. And democracy means freedom. Freedom and democracy are smushed together. When you think about it, there's no necessarily reason for that to be. I've written a little essay, Why Democracy Doesn't Work, and it just goes through, the big 4 reasons why democracy doesn't work. And I'm just going to be reading this here. The first is rational ignorance. Because you only have one vote and you won't influence an election, it is rational for most people to not spend much time researching the issues. Attempts to curb this problem could be to require, say, a poll test in order to vote, but that would be full of many obvious problems. Democracy depends on voters being informed on issues that each individual doesn't really have much of an impact on, which is to say, democracy depends on voters being irrational. Second problem is package deals. When you buy things from a store, you get to be a la carte to a great degree. You don't have to buy a complete kitchen set. You can buy the refrigerator and the microwave separately. Although you can buy the complete kitchen set, but you don't have to. Right? You're not locked into package deals. And the specificity of what you want, it depends on demand, right? Few care to buy each component of a refrigerator separately. As when they go into a supermarket, there is a limited selection, true, but that selection is tailored to what sells, right? And although you could order all of the components needed to create a refrigerator if you really wanted to and were so inclined. Now with democracy, your only choice is between platforms that have a shot at winning. And this is usually, only 2 or 3 different platforms, and it encompasses too many issues. Maybe you want schooling spending to be cut, right? Or maybe you want unemployment insurance to be cut or something like that. But each candidate or party is only willing to cut one or the other. And so you don't get to truly vote your preference, right? You can't truly vote for all of these things being cut. Not that it would matter because you only have one vote. The third problem is voting wars, right? This is pretty obvious. Group A votes itself the resources of Group B. Right? Simple enough. Elections aren't really a competition of ideas because trying to get Group A to vote for not getting free stuff from Group B is not a contest. It's begging a thief. Humans are moral animals, and so theft rationalization industries develop, right, which rationalizes the theft with Marxoid economic theories, appeals to racial identity more and more, and appeals to collective intergenerational debt, right, and various other studies and theories talking, sociological, mass psychological theories about oppression and class structure and all this pre-economic thought, right? And various other obtuse and roundabout justifications for what people already want to do, what democracy incentivizes, which is voting wars. Right? One of these rationalizations that I have found more recently is to call opponents of democracy social Darwinists, right? And that is, they support an evolutionary environment that enables irresponsible reproduction of their voting blocks, like the minority family that has a lot of kids that they can't raise, right? They support the reproduction of their voting blocks at the expense of responsible reproduction of their opponents, okay? But you are to believe that that is not social Darwinism. That's not social Darwinism. But when you advocate an environment that enables the reverse, which is no favoritism at all, that becomes social Darwinism. So let's be clear here. Social Darwinism equals an evolutionary environment that grants no favoritism to irresponsible reproduction of generally the takers at the expense of the makers. There's also the problem of the identity Democrat. And they don't necessarily mean advocate of the U.S. Democrat Party, although that correlation is pretty high. The identity Democrat fancies himself as an advocate of the little guy, and so masochistically votes for wealth redistribution schemes that actually harm him. The identity Democrat tends to be wealthy, often referred to as limousine liberals. Now, the identity Democrats tend to be, quote, progressives, close quote, on social issues, and they tend to be white, while the taker Democrats, who are going to become the dominant force in the Democrat Party, tend to be more social conservatives, and they tend to be, black and brown. And it's important to keep in mind that these people are not liberals. They are racial national socialists, right? Makers and the takers, Group A, voting themselves the resources of Group B. All right. The fourth problem is concentrated benefits, diffuse costs. When you cut unemployment insurance, you are no longer giving a concentrated group of people the money they need to survive. And a lot of them are going to die because you cut unemployment insurance. And this makes them extremely motivated in opposing cuts, right? Because you cutting that spending is going to cause this concentrated group of people to all die, or a lot of them to die, and they're going to fight back really hard to maintain their the extortion gravy train. Whereas the people paying for the unemployment benefits won't die from paying a little bit more in taxes or facing a little bit more inflation, and the cost is diffuse. Assuming only like 5% of the population is on unemployment benefits, the cost is going to be very diffused. The benefits are very concentrated on those people. Okay. The results of democracy are manifest. Constant increases in spending, with anti-spending movements being flash-in-the-pan spoiler operations, not full-scale offensive. The Taxed Enough Already, or T Party, has not achieved any of their goals of cutting spending, and they most certainly will not, since the incentives of democracy are all against it, as are many of the beneficiaries of democracy-enabled theft. One should place democracy in the same ideological zone as communism, because the underlying assumption of democracy is communism. Now, hear me out here. Because it assumes that things are already communally owned and thus can be voted on. Okay? If they weren't already communally owned, then they couldn't be voted on, right? If you actually owned what is called your home, then nobody could vote to take it away. If you actually owned what is called your money, no one could vote to increase taxes or tax any of it away. Right? The fact that this can be done assumes beforehand that it is communally owned and that the state is just allowing you to hold on to whatever they allow you to hold on to. And of course, that's another reason why many are militantly pro-democracy. Without it, nobody would care what any of them said or thought, because democracy is one person equals one vote. Right? And this gives worthless people a level of influence they couldn't achieve by more honest means. And, democracy is a form of communism, and the U.S. is a representative democracy. Right? You say, it's not a democracy, it's a republic. It's a representative democracy, all these problems apply. My prediction is that democracy will be remembered as a form of communism, or communism light. And just as we wonder how the USSR lasted as long as it did under the impossible regime of explicit communism, people will marvel at how the U.S. lasted as long as it did under the regime of implicit communism. And this is all pretty easy to understand. These aren't very complicated concepts, but it's just a little bit difficult for pro-American constitutionalist, Americanist ideologues to swallow. One last point is that democracy is inconsistent, right? Man supposedly needs a state because if left to his own devices, it'll be Mad Max or an anarchy boogeyman. Yet this state is to be controlled either through popularity contests, as in the case of representative democracy, or even worse, man's own judgment on abstract issues which he has no rational incentive to properly research, which is direct democracy. Man is fallen, and so man needs a state, but this state is to be controlled by man. Monarchy is at least consistent in its justifications. The same cannot be said for democracy.